one chapter in length. They're so brief that they're sometimes referred to as postcards or as tweets, and so that's where the title for the series came from, Tweets from God. We've already looked at Philemon and 2 John, which brings us to 3 John this morning, Jude next week. We might even take 2 weeks to look at Jude. It's a little bit longer. 3 John, one chapter, 14 verses. And I'll begin by just introducing you to the major characters and just giving you a very brief sort of background of what's happening in this letter, and then we'll jump in. 4 characters. Number 1, obviously, is John. John is the author. He identifies himself as he did when he wrote the letter of 2 John, we looked at last week, simply as the elder. He's not an elder, but he is the elder. This is John, you recall from last week. He's the aged one, the spiritual grandfather, great-grandfather to so many people. When he wrote this letter, he was probably in his 90s. That's cool. John is the last of the original 12 disciples, the last eyewitness to the life of Jesus, the last one who could say, I was with Jesus. I saw him do that. I heard him say that. And because of that, John is sort of revered and respected. He is the elder. He's the man. His words are weighty. Character number 2. You always need a villain, right? And so the villain in 3 John is this dude named Diotrephes. He's the troublemaker in the church. Well, churches are made up of imperfect people, so eventually there's conflict, and that conflict revolves around Diotrephes. And this is what was happening. You recall there were house churches, these gatherings of Jesus followers sort of scattered throughout much of the civilized world. And they relied upon these roving teachers who would travel from house church to house church and stay a couple days at this house church and depend upon the hospitality and the food and welfare from that particular house church, and they would move on. But that meant there was this very real danger that someone who was uninformed, perhaps not even a genuine believer, who would come and would teach untruth. And so these house churches needed to watch out for wolves in sheep's clothing. Remember that? The letter of 2 John was written about that issue too. John was saying you need to balance love and truth in dealing with this situation. You need healthy boundaries, healthy balance between love and truth, dealing with teachers who may come. Now, Diotrephes, he was one of the leaders in one of these house churches. But what he did was this. He rejected all teachers, all of these traveling teachers, even ones who were recommended by John. Apparently, Diotrephes felt that his authority, his position would be threatened by these teachers, so he refused to show hospitality to any of these teachers, which, understand again, it wasn't a literate society. They really depended upon people to come and bring news from the church, from the apostles, now which was John, to bring the truth to them. And so when he refused to allow any teachers to come, wouldn't show hospitality. In fact, Diotrephes went so far that he would kick out of his house church anybody who would show hospitality to a teacher. That's the issue. Character number 3, a guy named Gaius. Now this is the good guy in the white hat. He stood up to Diotrephes, and John writes this letter to commend Gaius for showing hospitality to these teachers. And then number 4, very quickly in passing, at the end of the letters, there's a guy named Demetrius, and he was probably the mailman. He delivered the letter, and he may also have been one of these teachers that John was recommending. Those are the 4 characters. That's the background. So let's begin. The tweet known as 3 John. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. I'm reading from the NIV, but I want you to see verse 2 in the New American Standard as well. New American Standard, verse 2. Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. Now in verse 2, John pens this very, very personal, very affectionate greeting. And I wanted to highlight that verse because there's a false teaching in our day and era known as faith teaching. Or sometimes it's called wealth, health, and prosperity teaching. And this teaching takes this verse and it says that Christians, through prayer and faith, should experience good health and prosperity. It is God's will that you always walk in perfect health, and that, if you don't, then you're living a Satan-defeated life, and you don't have enough faith. Seriously, that's what it's like. How do you live in a real world and say that? But that's the teaching. You just pray, and by faith you claim good health and prosperity. Or better yet, you send me money, and then I will pray for you so that you have good health and prosperity. And sometimes this is called name it and claim it teaching. Cynically, it's called blab and grab teaching. It really is very abusive and manipulative and absolutely ungrounded in the Scripture. And yet there is faith teaching, wealth, health, prosperity teaching, generally in charismatic churches. But John is simply saying this, verse 2, Gaius, if you could be physically as well off as you are spiritually, well, I wish that for you. I pray that for you. The ironic thing is that many teachers actually believe Gaius was a bit ill. He was probably physically sick, and this is like a get well card statement. It's like saying, hey, Gaius, I hope your physical well-being would match your spiritual well-being. Just think about that for a moment. Imagine if that prayer request was prayed about you or for you. The prayer request is, I pray that your physical well-being, your physical health is going to match your spiritual well-being. If someone prayed that and it was immediately answered, would your physical health is going to match your spiritual health? Are you going to be strong? Are you going to be sickly and anemic? Physical health, financial prosperity are not indicators of spiritual health, but your spiritual health is what it's really all about. I asked Jennifer to sing that song this morning, It Is Well With My Soul, and you know the background of that song. Terrible tragedy, incredible sadness, and yet the author of that could say, it is well with my soul. In spite of life falling apart, it's well with my soul. That is what matters. Verse 3, still writing to Gaius, he says, it gives me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. You can almost hear like this grandpa tone, this parent tone in that. He's so proud of his kids, of his grandkids. It just filled his heart. Quick grandpa story. My grandpa story, I get to do this now. Sunday, my granddaughters stay over, and my little granddaughter's sitting on my lap, 2-year-old, and I'm reading her stories, and she looks up at me and she goes, "Poppy, I like you." Oh, yes. Okay, well, that's the tone right there. John is saying that about Gaius. He's just so thrilled with Gaius's spiritual well-being. He probably led Gaius to faith, and he says, "I have no greater joy than to hear that you're just growing spiritually." Paul, in writing to the Thessalonians, says, "For what is our hope, our joy, our rejoicing?" He's asking that question. What is our joy? What is our rejoicing? Is it not even you? He's saying just the very fact that you're following Jesus, that you've been consistently walking with the Lord, that gives me great joy. That's what life is all about. That's the source of joy. And I want you to think about that for just a minute. Some of you guys get that. If you're a sponsor and someone you're in the 12-step movement and you've got a sponsee, and if that sponsee, let's even say that they decided to get sober because of your influence in their life, and then you're their sponsor, and they're just doing great. Life is coming together. They're overcoming their addiction and restoring those damaged relationships, getting life together. That's joy. And it's even greater in the Christian life when you disciple, or I don't like to use that word. We don't make disciples of ourselves. We make disciples to Jesus. But if you're mentoring someone, just encouraging them in their walk, and you see them growing, you experience joy. Invest your life in someone. That's the point. Verse 5. Dear friend. It's actually, the term is beloved. And again, it's so personal. It's so affectionate. John referring to Gaius. Beloved, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. Okay, remember the storyline? John is referring to Gaius, helping these traveling teachers. And they were strangers when they showed up and knocked on his door. But Gaius shelters them and he supports them. And that kind of hospitality was absolutely crucial in the early church. Again, they depended upon these traveling teachers to come and teach them. The teacher couldn't stay in the Holiday Inn. He needed the hospitality of people in the house church. So, dear friend, you are faithful in what you're doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. Verse 6, they have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name, and we'll come back to that. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought, therefore, to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth. There is this mission, this purpose in life that we have together. So again, John is just commending the fact that Gaius is this man of hospitality. He stood up to Diotrephes, who we haven't read about yet, but Gaius would always welcome these traveling teachers, just exuded joy and love of Christ. Now we come to the villain. Dun, 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 dun. Verse 9. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. And so when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. I mean, what's up with that? Seriously, what's up with that? The most telling fault line is right there in verse 9. Diotrephes loves to be first. Some versions say Diotrephes loves to be the leader. Another one says Diotrephes loves to have the preeminence. He was just full of himself. The name Diotrephes, interesting, perhaps just a sidebar, but it's a combination of two Greek words which means nursed or nurtured by Zeus. Nursed or nourished by Zeus. And Zeus was the chief god in the Greek pantheon of all their gods. But the custom in the early church was when a Greek convert came to Christ, they would discard their old pagan name at their baptism and take a Christian name. And so Diotrephes had not changed his name. What's to be made of that? If anything, we're uncertain. But it is at least ironic, isn't it? Diotrephes, who nourished by Zeus, is so full of himself. It's like he's the chief leader in this church. It's all about him. And I think that just struck me. It jumped out at me because of verse 7. These traveling teachers, the people who hosted them, all of them making a sacrifice, and they made a sacrifice for the sake of the name, capital N, for the name of Jesus. They, everyone sacrificed together. It wasn't about them, it was about Jesus. But for Diotrephes, who loved to be first, who loved to have the preeminence, it was all about him, his name. Put my therapy hat on here just for a bit. I got to analyze, we got to diagnose Diotrephes. In fact, I found a picture of him right here. Here's Diotrephes. There it is, it's all about him. And the next one, because perhaps the label we put on him is narcissism. Okay? Yeah, there's the narcissist. And these days that term narcissist gets tossed around all the time as sort of an all-purpose insult, this description of sort of self-aggrandizing, obnoxious personality. It's used all the time, that term. So I wanted to take a moment just to talk about narcissism. Therapy hats on, okay? Because I honestly believe we have to integrate therapy and theology if we're going to bring people to maturity in Christ. We're just in such a messed up world and so often dealing with such difficult people. And it's more than take 2 Bible verses and call me in the morning. We integrate those together. So narcissism. Narcissism is a personality disorder. Personality disorders differ from major mental illnesses like schizophrenia or manic depression. These mental illnesses, they have a biological origin. The origin of personality disorders is a failure in character development. It forms when the attachment, this is one of the theories, between infant and primary caregiver somehow go awry. And so maybe you have this cold, neglectful, abusive parent on one end of the extreme, or maybe it's this over-involved, smothering, hovering sort of parent who little Johnny, every impulse that he has gets gratified, and that produces narcissistic tendencies in children. The name narcissism actually comes from this Greek myth. You may know this, the myth about Narcissus. Beautiful boy who was unable to love until one day he saw his own reflection in the water and he fell in love with himself, eventually dying as he pined away at his own beautiful image, in love with himself. Isn't that telling? So according to the APA, American Psychiatric Association, about 1% of the general population has narcissistic personality disorder. But researchers in the field are saying that is significantly underestimated. Just saw this book, it was entitled The Narcissism Epidemic, and the authors estimate that about 10% of today's young people have clinical manifestations of narcissistic personality disorder. Okay? And being an old fart, I could say, yeah, kids today are narcissistic. But that just proves that the word narcissism is way overused. But isn't that interesting? We sort of look at parenting styles and then whatever's happening in society and the growth of narcissism. The author said narcissism can be summed up as contempt of other people and their emotions. A lack of empathy is a hallmark of narcissistic personality disorder. Healthy shame, that painful sense that one has acted in an unacceptable way, is another emotion that's largely missing from the person with narcissistic personality disorder. They're convinced there is nothing wrong with them. It's everyone else around them that's impossible. Everyone else around them that's crazy. Anybody know a narcissist? Don't point, but do you know anyone? Yeah, personality disorders run on a continuum. So there is mild cases, there are severe cases. And so the label is hard to apply. And one of the reasons the statistics vary so much and are underestimated perhaps is because narcissism, well, narcissists don't show up in the therapist's office. They don't. If a narcissist does seek treatment, the outcome is usually the therapist is driven crazy because the therapist or the pastor just dreads working with them because eventually we become the problem, we're devalued, we're criticized. That's narcissism. And yet narcissists have skills. They have qualities like confidence and they're sort of generally very extroverted and they desire to rise to leadership, and foolish pastors elevate people like that, companies, and the result is because of the makeup of their personality, eventually there's just disastrous consequences. For example, Diotrephes didn't just stop with wanting to be the big cheese. He became manipulative and vindictive, spreading malicious nonsense about us, John writes, verse 10. Tearing down others to advance his position. He actually kicked people out of the church who tried to host these traveling teachers. He wouldn't allow these teachers to speak, even if John, the elder, recommended them. So some speculate that Diotrephes felt that authority and position, his authority and position were being threatened. And so if he was going to submit to John, that would be to acknowledge in his mind that he was in some kind of subservient position, and a narcissist isn't going to allow that. His teaching, so far away from Jesus, who said, you who want to be great, you become a servant to all. And you're not going to rule like the Gentiles who lorded over their flock, but you become a servant. So far away. And so John speaks very harshly. I'm going to come and I'm going to rat this guy out. We're going to deal with this. And the reason he's so passionate about all of that is he wants to protect the health of the church. Verse 11, he concludes the letter. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, meaning the example of Diotrephes. Do not imitate what is evil, but what is good, the example of Gaius. And it needs to be said because it is just our human nature to react in kind when someone is being abusive towards us, when someone is speaking malicious things about you. Boy, you want to react. Don't do that. Imitate what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Verse 12, we get character number 4 real quickly here. Demetrius, Here's another example. He's well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. There's the standard. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. John is saying, you want a role model? Here, don't use Diotrephes. Here's another example. This guy, Demetrius. Little letter, often overlooked letter, but again, so practical, because in the church, in life, we're going to encounter difficult people, people that might resemble Diotrephes. And when we encounter, well, I made a note here. In the church, in life, we encounter difficult people. I encountered one when I looked in the mirror this morning. That's true. Okay. But we will encounter Diotrephes. We will. And that's when we really need the Spirit to be working in our life, to produce love and joy, peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. Father, we're so thankful for your grace to us. So much in this little letter that we really could rest on. And we pray for your Spirit to do that in our life. Is the health of the soul more important to us than the health of our body? What is the well-being of our soul? Ground us in that and cause us to seek you, the healing that comes from your forgiveness and for your love. And if there's joy lacking in our lives, remind us we need to invest our lives in something greater than ourselves, something that is eternal, and that is you, your church, and your people. Convict us of that. And Father, when we encounter difficult people, we would pray your Spirit, your Son would be manifested in our lives so that we would bring honor to you and not disgrace or shame to your name by the way we act. And we ask that because we're so grateful for a Savior and all he's done in our life. We pray in Jesus' name. Let's stand together. And that line about it, it's for the sake of the name. I chose this last song just to be reminded. That's what it's all about. The name that's above all names. The name at which every knee will bow and every tongue will confess someday that Jesus is Lord.